Congratulations! So you've been awarded an LSTA grant, and now you might be wondering what happens next. And that's what this webinar is all about. I am Jamie Ball, the Grants Administrator for the Arizona State Library Archives and Public Records. And here is our agenda for today. We're going to do an overview of what you need to know to administer an LSTA grant. We'll talk about money and how to track expenses, allowable costs, those types of things. We'll look at evaluating your project and collecting data to report your findings to IMLS. We'll also talk about promoting your project and how to market it to your stakeholders and, of course, to your target audience. And we'll also talk about the reporting requirements, the interim and final reports. So let's get into this. Our goal is to ensure that you have the tools you need to manage and evaluate and report on your project. This webinar is designed primarily for recipients who have never received an LSTA grant, the newbies, your first timers, but it can also serve as a refresher for those of you who have received a grant in the past. Here are some dates and deadlines that you'll find in the grant guidelines. There's the URL at the bottom of the slide. And today is May 12th, the grant recipients webinar. And you can see you have all the way into 2024 to actually complete the project. Another piece of the overview is to look at the award notification that you received last week on May 5th. You'll find the state project number, the assistance listing number, which is formerly known as the CFDA. These are numbers that typically the finance department would like to have. You'll also see your period of performance, which starts today and ends August 2nd, 2024, and the final report due date. Also, along with your award notification were some assurances and certifications that need to be signed. And we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. These assurances and certifications are primarily for federal regulations with which we all must comply. So you must assure us, as well as the federal funder, IMLS, that you will not discriminate, that you will not do business with any entity that's been debarred from doing business with the federal government or is exempt from doing business with the federal government. And you can find out about debarment through the System for Award Management, which is called SAM.gov. And you can go to sam.gov and look up an entity that you want to do business with, and it will tell you if there's been some issues with the feds in the past, in which case you are not allowed to spend any federal funds on them. You must also certify that you won't use LSTA funding for construction or to influence legislation, federal or state legislation, that you will not traffic in human beings, that you will maintain a drug-free workplace, and that you will comply with the Children's Internet Protection Act, the Internet Safety. So all of those assurances and certification forms were attached to your award notification email, and those forms need to be signed by your authorizing official and returned to the email address libgrants@azlibrary.gov. Also attached to that award notification email was a request for payment form. And this does not need to be signed by your authorizing official unless that's required by your organization. You could sign this when you're ready to start spending funds. And just as a reminder, it could take 30 to 45 days for funds to be disbursed once we receive your request for payment. So please be sure to get that form to us before June 30th of next year. We understand that some libraries run on a reimbursement basis and that you prefer to basically spend all your money and then get the grant to reimburse you. That's fine as long as we get that request for payment by June 30th, 2024. Please request the entire amount and be prepared to spend that money upon receipt. LSTA funds cannot be deposited deposited into an interest-bearing account. So you can't just get it and then have it accrue interest. And as you saw previously on those due dates and deadlines, the funds must be encumbered by August 2nd. So all your POs need to be done by August 2nd of 2024 and then fully expended by September 6th of that year. So for your final report, you're going to need to explain how you spent all of your LSTA funds. You're going to report on all of the match that you also provided, whether that was in cash or in kind. And you really should start working as soon as you can with your finance department to make sure that all these funds are allocated properly and in the correct budget categories. I'm talking primarily about the final report, needing expenses for that, but you may need to show expenses in the interim report as well. And although we don't need copies of any of your purchase orders and receipts, you'll need to keep those for at least 3 years after you submit your final report as part of the records retention requirements. So I mentioned match, and that, as I said, it could be cash or in kind, but it is required. So you need to put some kind of skin into the game. It could be your salary, what the time that you have put into administering the grant and running the programs. That's fine. There is no minimum, just as long as there is some match. The match must be applied to the same budget categories as the grant, and the match must be for allowable expenses, allowable costs. So we're going to talk a little bit about unallowable costs here in a minute, but your match must also be allowable, just like the LSTA expenses. This should look familiar to you because this is the budget form, basically, that you use to apply for the grant. And so the same categories will be presented to you at the end of the project, where you explain what you expended the funds on. And so here are a few of the unallowable costs. So you can't use LSTA funds on clothing or on gifts or souvenirs. You can't use it to make up for bad debts. And I already mentioned construction. You can't use it for contributions or donations, performances, entertainment, food. That's a big one. I know that some of the really cool projects lately have been around health literacy and teaching people how to use foods for more nutritious cooking and so forth. That's great, but food is an unallowable cost. It can't be presented on the LSTA budget either as a direct cost or as match. You can't use LSTA funds for interests or existing staff and salaries. And you can't use the grant funds for to charge to another grant. So let's say you've got another grant going. You're like, hey, I've overspent over here. I'll just use a little LSTA money to make up the difference. Nope, no can do. So if you're in doubt about what's allowable or unallowable, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or the grant coordinator, because there are sometimes some shifts in what the meaning of unallowable and allowable is. And so I'm always happy to help out with that. So basically, what you are aiming for is to be on time and within the budget. You're going to certify that the funds were fully expended, and you must spend the entire award, not a penny more or a penny less. And any changes that you might have across the budget categories require prior approval from the grants coordinator. And so that leads us into other issues and when you might need to contact the grants coordinator. So let's see if we can look at a few questions here and just take a look at these questions as they come up and see if you think the answer is yes or no about when you should contact the grants coordinator. So the first one, your project called for buying ebooks, but now you want to buy hard copies. Should you contact the grants coordinator? And the answer would be yes, because this is a change not only in the types of data you would collect, but perhaps you were originally awarded under a digital access initiative or category, and this departure would really change what your application is all about. Your project called for buying Wi-Fi access points, and you decided to change the vendor. Do you need to contact the grants coordinator? No. Vendor selection is really up to you, and as long as they're in good standing with the federal government, again, they're not debarred, we trust that you have procedures in place to deal with this. You were going to buy a $3,000 copier and $2,000 in supplies, but now you want to buy a $5,000 copier and will match the supplies locally. Do you contact the grants coordinator? Yes, because a single item over $5,000 or more is considered equipment, and it has its own set of rules. And we must ask prior approval from IMLS for such a purchase. So yes, anything that changes over to 5,000, please contact us. You find out that your budget has been cut, and including what you were going to use for match on your project. Do you need to contact the grants coordinator? Yes. So any changes to your project budget need to be discussed with us so we can work together to find solutions for that. You had staffing changes among the people who are helping on the project. Should you contact us? Well, while it may be helpful for you to keep track of turnover, you may need to report on this because it impacted your project. As long as the work is getting done, we don't need to know about this kind of personnel change. So no. But let's say you had staffing changes, notably the person who's managing the project. In this case, please contact us because we need to be able to keep up to date with whoever is managing the project. Let's say your project bought e-readers and then a patron broke one of them. Do you need to contact us? Nope. This can be handled according to your existing policies, and we don't need to get involved in that. You thought you turned in all the paperwork, but you haven't seen your funds yet. Do you need to contact us? Yes, go right ahead and reach out to us because we're happy to check for paperwork, to contact our finance department, hunt down transaction numbers, etc. But please don't forget, it can take 30 to 45 days from when you request funds to when you might receive them. And you've realized that there's no way your project's going to get done on time, within budget, or maybe at all. Oh, please let us know as soon as possible. You won't be the first project manager to run into difficulties, but the sooner you let us know, the sooner we can make adjustments. Often we can find a solution, we can reallocate those funds, but it becomes problematic if we find out too late about the money and we aren't able to put the money to good work, and then we have to return it to IMLS, which we hate to do. And finally, you're going to have extra money after you're completing your project. Should you let the grants coordinator know? Yes. As I said before, we can almost always find a way to help you use those funds or to reallocate them at the state library level. We just would need to figure out a way to spend the money in a different way. Okay, so let's talk about evaluation now. So why do we evaluate? Well, for several reasons. We do want to tell a national story. Our grants here in Arizona are part of a whole national program. We want to share promising practices and gain information to make decisions about priorities, program design, to communicate the value of the programs and services to stakeholders. And last but not least, the federal regulations require evaluation. So basically, you have a dream. When you applied for this grant, you had a vision of some change you wanted to make. And so evaluation helps you determine, did your dream come true? There are three basic questions that you can ask is how much did we do? What good did we do? And what could we do better? So how much did we do? These are quantity type questions. And IMLS has set things up inside of projects. So there are 4 types of activities and different ways of measuring them. So instruction and content activities are generally what we all do with these grants. Less often we have planning and evaluation activities and procurement type activities. There is an activity data collection spreadsheet that you will use. You need to actually track your activities using the spreadsheet, and you will supply it with your final report. So it's a good thing to get into that Google Drive, which there's a link to it in your award notification email, and it's also on the slide, to start familiarizing yourself with what these activities are and what they mean. And there's a nice glossary tab that explains what each of them actually mean. So here are a couple of screenshots from those spreadsheets, from the activity data collection spreadsheet, showing you that here's a program activity and the kinds of data that you're going to collect. These are really typical for us. What was it, an in-person activity or virtual? How long was the session? How many sessions in the program? How many people attended? Where were the programs held? Presentations are very similar. There are content activities such as acquisitions and lending. And again, this is not going to be foreign to most of us because it's going to ask how many hardware were acquired, how many print materials were acquired, and then circulation, the items that were purchased, how many of those items circulated. But this is a little tricky. I tend to think about circulation as how much circulation I had with the activities, I'm sorry, with the material. So one book circulated 10 times. That's not really what IMLS is looking for here. Of the items purchased with LSTA funds, how many of those actually circulated? So it's a little different take on it than what we're used to. 2 more of the content activity counts are preservation and creation. And again, looking at the glossary tab, you'll see how these are actually defined. So I want to show you how this could actually work with a sample and made-up project. There's a library I'm calling the Nimbus Public Library, and they provided digital literacy training for seniors in 2 locations, at the library and a nearby senior center. They used the LSTA funds to purchase laptops and software. They also used the funds to hire a trainer who provided a number of classes and consultations. And then each class was 45 minutes long, and the average attendance was 3 to 9 people. And then here are the topics that were covered, basic Windows functions, Google, email, and cybersecurity. So how does this look in the activity data collection spreadsheet? There's a couple of different ways to do this. And so I'm showing on this slide 2 different ways to go about it. You could treat the entire program as one thing, and it's digital literacy for seniors. And the course covers, in the brief description, a course covering topics on basic Windows, Google searching, email, and cybersecurity. They were delivered in person, and then you have the number of sessions in the program were the 4 different topics, and then the average number in attendance and the number of times the program was administered. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to take each of the topics that were in this program and treat them individually. So you would say basic Windows, and then how to open and edit and save and share files in Windows, etc. And then you would actually only have 1 session in this program because that is this session is on Windows and the number of times it was administered. So this is not a right or wrong. It's more about how distinctive you think the programs are. It's really a judgment call. And again, if you have a question about it, please don't hesitate to ask. And then the other piece of this project were the consultations and the acquisition. So you could see here were the number of consultations that the trainer provided, and then here are those laptops and software that we had mentioned before. So that is basically what it means to capture your quantities. The main thing is to try to capture as much as you possibly can of the quantities. But in addition, we want to know what good did we do? And this gets into qualitative or outcomes rather than outputs. So you're looking for changes in your target audience, in their skills, their knowledge, behavior, attitude, status, life condition. These are harder to track, but they are extremely valuable to attain. Ways to try to get to those outcomes are through surveys and tests, focus groups and interviews. You could use a tool like Project Outcome. Definitely try measuring change from established baselines whenever possible. And again, you can find some of these tools in the Google Drive. One of the tools we have is a quick patron survey. And these questions are required by IMLS. And I have a little note about this survey in a minute, but these are for adults. Any kind of instruction activity that you're doing would require you to deliver the survey. Anything where there's an interaction and some kind of a learning is supposed to take place, which doesn't really apply to presentations, but really only to programs, workshops, and those type of instruction activities. Another tool in the Google Drive folder is a survey summary to help you sort of combine all of the responses so that it'll be easier for you to put them into the final report. So here's my important note about surveys I wanted to mention. So IMLS only requires for you to survey program participants who are 18 years or older. But that doesn't mean it's worthwhile to try to collect data from your younger participants. And I have the little icons below. This is a common way to try to gain some responses from children, is to have them sort of circle whether they really liked it, kind of liked it, didn't like it, hated it, whatever other means you could think of to try to evaluate children is definitely welcome. So you're trying to analyze some data. You can collect what we call annex data. So they're anecdotes, but they provide impact and tell that you're doing some good with your project. You can also observe participant behavior. And sometimes you have outcomes that are just really show that you made a difference, even though it's not in anybody's survey. And an example I could share is when I was at a library in Round Valley, we started a robotics club with the middle school. And shortly after the LSTA grant was over, the 8th graders formed a team called Elksplosion, I guess because it's the Round Valley Elks is their mascot. And they won the Rookie All-Star Award in their first year of competition. That tells a story that hardly any surveys can about the impact that LSTA grant had in that community. And then finally, in the evaluation, we can look at what we could do better. And those are lessons that we learned that we can share with the library community. As we go through the project, we can make course corrections, even during the grant cycle. Or we can address those issues in our next LSTA application. Okay, so now let's go on to the storytelling portion of this webinar. And what we mean by telling your LSTA story is a combination of things. So Acknowledging IMLS and the Arizona State Library in all of your products and publications, promoting your project to your community, including your target audience, making stakeholders aware of what it is that you're doing, and then celebrating your success. So the semi-official acknowledgement, there's several different ways you can do it, but we make this acknowledgement on all of our materials. It's available on the LSTA website through the state library. We also have a Spanish translation available. Um, Please use the acknowledgement in all publicity that the project is supported by the Arizona State Library Archives and Public Records, a division of the Secretary of State with federal funds from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. For more information about how to communicate IMLS's support, there's a grantee communication kit available on their website. Promoting your project, we try to support you by providing a press release template on the Google Drive, as well as a thank you letter to Congresspeople. Please take photos throughout your project. They're very powerful, and it enables us to help you tell the story. Be sure to keep photo release forms on file at your library. Again, we don't need to see those, but we need to be assured that you are giving us permission to use those photos. And then, you and we will share your LSTA stories as far and wide as we possibly can. So who are you trying to reach with your project? It's important to think about how different audiences require not only different vehicles for delivering information, but also different content. So, obviously some groups of people are more into social media than others. In the small towns that I grew up in and that I worked in, the phone pole, the flyer on the phone pole was extremely effective. So, it really depends. But also the contents. So one of the things we're all learning is how, for instance, if you have a project where teens are your target audience, that they want to engage with content. They want to give feedback. They want to share the content. They want to support projects that address issues that they find valuable. So it's important to share your library's values with teens so that they know that they are supporting something worthwhile. So that's just an example, and you would do the same thing whether you're dealing with seniors or working adults or whomever it might be. One word about marketing that it's a little bit tricky, but LSTA funds can't be used to market the library in general. We encourage you to use LSTA funds to market your project, but you can't market the library services in general unless you are trying to address the needs of specific underserved individuals, such as people from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds or people with disabilities or limited literacy skills. If you have any doubt about whether funds are being used in an allowable fashion for promotion, if you have any doubts at all, just please contact me. Okay, finally, on to the last, whoa, not quite yet. I want to say one more thing about promotion is celebrating your success. So think about involving your partners, if you have project partners, community members in some kind of a launch event or a capstone event. Please consider inviting the Secretary of State, who might be available to do a check presentation or some other program, and invite the state librarian to help celebrate such an event, as well as members of library development and the grants coordinator. Okay, now I think we're ready to go on to the last section, which has to do with reporting requirements. So we will ask for an interim report and a final report. So just to be sure you are aware, these types of data are required for both the general and the express grants. The survey tools are applicable for both types of grants, and please use them to keep track of the quantities listed in the activity data collection spreadsheet. The interim report is fairly brief, and it generally comes out in the spring of next year. We will be asking for confirmation that you're expending the funds in an allowable way and asking if you'll be able to complete all the activities within the period of performance, verifying that the funds are all going to be spent, and also give you an opportunity to share positive stories or lessons learned, any photos or other collateral items that you are using in your project. The final report, again, is due September 2024. And when it is ready, which is usually the summer, next summer, you'll receive an email notification with the link. The grants management system is where you will find the final report. It's the same place where you submitted your application. So hopefully this looks familiar. You'll click the requirements tab and you should see the LSTA final report listed. If you have any issues whatsoever, just contact me. And I'm going to kind of zip through this next part because it's fairly self-explanatory. But the final report comes in 5 parts, asking for general project information, a summary of the project, the activities that you did, your findings or results, and then the expenditures. The general project information is very straightforward. The abstract is just pretty much like the project summary that you had in your application, except for it should be in the past tense. You'll describe what you did, for whom. You will break out the activities by type, such as instruction or content, as we've already discussed. You'll have a brief narrative, a sentence or two, that describes the activities. And all of this is based on that activity data collection spreadsheet. So that's something that you should download sooner rather than later so you can start using it to track your activities. The final report will ask about important outcomes as well as overall quantities such as percentage of participants who are satisfied, or the number of new families who joined, or some usage increase. And then you'll be asked why these findings are important and how they made a difference. And then you'll be asked about lessons learned and will you continue the project and how you would sustain it. The expenditures portion, again, is based on the same budget categories you should be familiar with. The only thing I want to point out here is that there is a certain level of detail required in the description. So, for instance, you would say if you have a match of staff salaries, you would want to give like the number of FTEs and the number of hours that they worked. We would like to see outside consultants, anyone who paid a consultant fee to. We would like to see their names. We'd like to know where you traveled, if you have a travel expense. You know, these types of details to describe what you spent the money on. And one thing I want to say is that this budget is not, I'm sorry, not the budget, this expense report is not visible to the public. So even though final reports do end up in a public portal that IMLS hosts, this portion is not made visible. And then there are the pictures. There's a place that we ask for additional materials. And there's just nothing like being able to share some images with IMLS that they can then put in their blog and put in some of their publications. So please take pictures as you go. Just a few writing tips for the final report. Please use professional language and don't use any personal staff names, just use their titles. Don't use any bullets or other formatting elements in the final report. They won't come through, or they'll come through looking very, very strange. Write for non-librarians, so avoid acronyms and jargon as much as possible. It's always a good idea to ask someone to review and proofread that final report before you submit it. And I thought that was the end, but wait, there's a little bit more. So I had mentioned that the final reports do end up on the IMLS public projects portal. And that's the imls-spr.imls.gov. You'll see the public portal, and you can search for other projects throughout the country back to, I want to say, 2016 or so. So it's a really great resource to be aware of. You may be asked to participate in AZLA's annual conference or in a regional forum to share what you've done with your project. You may be asked to provide information for the media, and you may be asked to share your experiences with other Arizona library workers. I would definitely ask you first before just passing out your info, but just wanted you to be aware that that's something that we hope you would be open to. So just to recap, the major tools that you can use are the grant guidelines, the award notification email, Google Drive, and state library staff. The guidelines have those important dates and the budget categories, as well as frequently asked questions, records retention requirements, how to invite the Secretary of State and State Librarian to your event. And there's a URL to find the guidelines. The Google Drive has the grant recipients packet, which was also attached to your award notification, but it has the surveys, the survey templates, the activity data collection spreadsheet, and some things that you might find helpful for project promotion. And there's a URL for that, the Google Drive. State library staff are always here to help. Library development is especially important resource, and I am always here to help too. Just drop me an email anytime. Once again, congratulations on your award, and here's my contact info again. And thank you very much for attending this webinar.